Well, hello everyone. Good afternoon. We're just waiting for a few more people to jump on. I see we're steadily climbing in our participants here. We're going to give it a minute or two just for the room to fill up and we'll get started. Um, in the meantime, I think it could be useful to do a little bit of housekeeping and talk a bit about some of the other events happening at the hub here in the near future. Um, Housekeeping. We do have a chat function enabled down there, kind of in the middle of the screen. I'd ask everyone that's joining, please introduce yourselves. Where are you dialing from? What part of the hydrogen value chain are you involved or associated with? We would ask, please keep everything, all the comments respectful, of course. And next to that chat button, we do have a Q&A button. And I'd encourage everyone throughout the presentation, please pop in questions as they come up. And we're going to try our best to make sure the panelists answer them at the end of the presentation. I will note when you joined, it did say this webinar is being recorded. It is, and it will be posted to our website, calgaryhydrogen.ca, next week. So I see people are still popping in. But I guess while we continue to wait for folks to arrive, hey, I may as well shamelessly plug a few more things happening at the hub. First is our next Hub at the Pub event, which will be happening on August 20th at Bricks and Barrel, located in downtown Calgary. Following that, we'll be having the first of our strategic webinar series on August 28th. This webinar is going to be focused on the hydrogen mobility pilots that are underway in Calgary, on interfacing with Calgary, and really focus on the need for shared hydrogen fueling infrastructure to enable their success, and a pretty pertinent discussion on that. So as always, to keep up to date on all of our events and webinars and all the stuff that's happening, I'd encourage everyone to follow us on LinkedIn and sign up for our mailing list at calgaryhydrogen.ca. So I see people are still coming in, but it seems to be slowing down a bit. So maybe we can get started with a land acknowledgement. So the hub, located in the heart of southern Alberta, both acknowledges and pays tribute to the traditional territories of the peoples of Treaty 7. This includes the Blackfoot Confederacy, comprised of the Siksika, Piikani, and Kainai First Nations, the Tsuut'ina First Nation, and the Stoney Nakoda, which includes the Chiniki, Bearspaw, and Goodstoney First Nations. The city of Calgary is also home to Métis Nation of Alberta, Districts 5 and 6. So now that we've started this webinar in a good way, and I see people have kind of slowed down joining, my name is Zach Cunningham, and I lead the Calgary Region Hydrogen Hub. I want to thank everybody in attendance for really taking the time out of their busy days to come and learn more on what I view as an increasingly pertinent topic, hydrogen purity and testing. This webinar and topic directly speaks to one of the main goals of the Calgary Region Hydrogen Hub, that is to build interest, expertise, and capacity in hydrogen and help connect organizations within the hydrogen space to each other. I think really it's quite clear that as the use of hydrogen as an energy carrier ramps up, the need for testing is also going to increase dramatically. I think most of us here have heard of the 5 nines of hydrogen purity, but similar to all things in the energy world, there are nuances. And hopefully this webinar is going to help clear up any misconceptions. So with that, I'm going to introduce our panelists today, and then I'll pass it to them to present for around 35 to 40 minutes or so, and then we'll follow up with a Q&A period. So we have two panelists today, both with extensive experience in the hydrogen testing space. They are Adam Malcolm and Martin Huard. So Adam is the Director of Applied Chemistry Services at InnoTech Alberta, where he works with a team of multidisciplinary researchers and technologists to provide professional lab services to the private and public sectors. He has a master's degree in chemistry from the U of A, having specialized in physical and synthetic inorganic chemistry. He has 16 years of experience across both private and public sectors, in the field and in the lab. He's managed projects ranging from academic, pilot scale, all the way up to full-scale chemistry. Adam will also jump at any chance to show you pictures of his kids, talk shop on photography, comic books, or really interestingly, Microsoft Excel World Championships. We're going to have to connect on that offline, Adam. And our second panelist today is Martin Huard. And Martin is the hydrogen lead at InnoTech Alberta. He coordinates the creation of test facilities and services for clean hydrogen research and technology development. Martin has worked with InnoTech Alberta since 2014. He is a member of the Canadian MIR Committee for the ISO TC Hydrogen at Scale and Horizontal Energy Systems Technical Committee. Martin also participates as a technical advisor on the Carbon Capture and Conversion Facilities Working Group at Canada's Oil Sands Innovation Alliance, COSIA. So, gentlemen, with that, I'm really pleased to have you here. Thank you so much for taking the time to present to us. I'm going to pass it over to you, Martin, please, if you'd like to start off.
Great. Thanks so much for the wonderful intro, Zach, and hi to everybody on the call today. So Adam and I will be presenting on the topic of hydrogen purification and quality testing. Bear with me for a moment as I bring up my screen. And just want to verify with Adam or Zach that you're able to see the slides on screen.
Looking good on my end.
Yeah,
Perfect. Great. So just a quick note and intro about the image that's shown on the title slide here. This is a photo from InnoTech Alberta's hydrogen quality testing lab. So that's myself in the photo, along with one of our colleagues, Chris Goss, who's a technologist responsible for setting up the equipment that we're using in our quality testing center that we'll discuss and describe briefly today. So thank you to the Calgary Region Hydrogen Hub for providing us with this opportunity to discuss this very important topic to many folks working in the hydrogen ecosystem. Some of the topics we will cover today in the webinar. We'll first introduce everyone to the Hydrogen Center of Excellence. Then we'll talk about different types of impurities that can come into a hydrogen product, as well as how they affect different use cases and equipment which are fueled by hydrogen. We'll briefly talk about different hydrogen purification methods to improve the quality of a hydrogen product. And we'll close off talking about hydrogen purity and quality standards, as well as hydrogen quality testing. So just to start, to give everybody on the call an intro to our organization, InnoTech Alberta is part of the Alberta Innovates family of organizations. So we are government agencies within the government of Alberta. Alberta Innovates is InnoTech's parent company. Alberta Innovates essentially provides funding programs and coaching and support to companies developing new technologies or looking to pilot or deploy technologies in their existing operations. There are two subsidiaries under Alberta Innovates. So Adam's company and my company, InnoTech Alberta, we provide applied research and testing services, as well as technology development and piloting services to any entity out there in the world who needs this kind of help in advancing technology development across many different sectors of the economy. And our sister company, C4 Technologies, they specialize in full-scale testing as well as engineering consulting services. So our work at InnoTech, as well as at Alberta Innovates and C4 Technologies, is really driven from the Alberta Hydrogen Roadmap, which was published in 2021 by the Government of Alberta. And that document laid out 7 policy pillars for the advancement and creation of a hydrogen ecosystem and economy in Alberta. The key policy pillar, which really drives our activity at Alberta Innovates and the subsidiaries, is this piece around activating technology and innovation, because that's really our focus area. It's a natural area for us to work in. So that policy pillar led to the creation of Alberta's Hydrogen Center of Excellence, which is essentially a funding program and a capital projects program. The funding program part of the Center of Excellence is essentially coming to a close in the next year or two. All of the program funding has essentially been dispersed to various recipients and award winners, and they're I believe something like 30 to 40 different hydrogen technology projects that are ongoing with that program funding. But with some of the capital funding that came through the Center of Excellence program, that led to the creation of test facilities at InnoTech Alberta and CFR, which are either completed or in progress of being set up and completed. And those test facilities are intended to provide client services and drive internal research activities to essentially stimulate the advancement of hydrogen technologies from, earlier stage developments through to as close to commercialization as possible. So we're essentially enablers and supporters to help companies out there developing new hydrogen technologies. Looking at global opportunities, gaps, and other challenges out there in the hydrogen ecosystem, some of the opportunities we see that were kind of laid out in the Alberta Hydrogen Roadmap that are relevant to Alberta. Globally, there's the potential for a $700 billion annual sales of hydrogen by 2050. So that's obviously a very kind of ambitious forecast. There's also the potential for $11 trillion to be invested in the hydrogen economy by 2050. And Alberta, within that global context, is very well positioned to take advantage of some of this opportunity. So we have incredible resources for hydrogen production in Alberta. We have very extensive capacity for carbon capture, utilization, and storage. We also have existing hydrogen production and transportation infrastructure, as well as very skilled labor and expertise that's relevant to the hydrogen industry. And of course, in Alberta, we have a very innovative and entrepreneurial landscape. The Alberta Hydrogen Roadmap also laid out a specific implementation plan of how it envisioned creating a hydrogen economy in Alberta. And InnoTech Alberta is in the process of either providing or developing capabilities in the areas that are kind of highlighted in yellow. So I won't go into all of those, but the topic today about hydrogen quality and purity is really stemming from the work we're doing in the Hydrogen Center of Excellence, which I will briefly touch on here in the next slide. So through the work of the Hydrogen Center of Excellence, InnoTech Alberta has been able to create a wide array of test facilities to support activities across the hydrogen value chain. I won't go into every specific piece of equipment or facility that we're setting up, but the Hydrogen Quality Center is one of the cornerstones of the work we're doing in the Center of Excellence to allow clients and companies out there in the world to send hydrogen samples to us for quality analysis and characterization. So moving on now to more of the main topic of the discussion today, I want to briefly introduce the audience to the concept of the hydrogen value chain. This particular way of showing the value chain comes from the latest version of the hydrogen ladder, and that analysis is essentially a way of trying to assess which use cases for hydrogen are at the global scale the most promising or economic to pursue. So this specific way of looking at things is not necessarily specific to Alberta or Western Canada or anything like that. It provides a more global view. But what I like about how this hydrogen value chain is mapped out from production through to transportation, distribution, and to end use is that it shows some of the main production pathways where hydrogen contaminants can enter the system. And it also shows various key components where contamination of hydrogen can occur as it moves from where it's produced through to where it's used by consumers. So on that note, some of the key feedstocks that are used to make hydrogen are, from hydrocarbons, including natural gas, heavy oil, coal, or biomass, also from water, and increasingly from natural hydrogen. Some of the main co-products from hydrogen production, especially from hydrocarbons, include carbon dioxide and carbon monoxide, as well as particulates in the form of carbon. And in the case of hydrogen produced through electrolysis, oxygen can also be a key contaminant or co-product. In some of the key end use cases for hydrogen, there are different purity requirements. And this is just kind of the entry point to talking about purity and quality. But you can see in different use cases for hydrogen, there are slightly different purity requirements ranging from, the low 50 mole percent for some uses in fuel cells, all the way up to 99.999x% in things like PM or PEM fuel cells used for road vehicle applications. So Adam, I'll switch over to you now for a moment to talk a little bit about why hydrogen quality matters.
Great. Thanks, Marty. So I want to answer this question by starting with a really specific example that I think we can all relate to, and that is vehicles. So why hydrogen quality matters is the answer for vehicles is very similar to why the quality of your gasoline matters for your vehicle. You're trying to protect the engine. You're trying to ensure that the materials you put in that device or that machine are compatible with that machine. You want to make sure that when you go to a fueling station or you dispense energy, fuel from any source, that you know you're getting a standardized, known substance. It also then translates over to whether your warranty for your vehicle remains valid, whether you remain in compliance for having that vehicle be roadworthy. And just like with your vehicle, what you put in can affect how much maintenance you have to do. How often does that machine go down? And so, if we're thinking about fuel cell vehicles, the answer is the same for fuel cell as it is for internal combustion. And at the end of the day, this is kind of a tapestry of both private and public sector stakeholders who are all trying to accomplish the same thing. They're trying to protect people that are using them, the people that are around them. They're trying to protect assets that are in the vicinity of a fuel cell vehicle. They're trying to protect the environment and their own reputation. They're also trying to make sure they're monitoring that the product quality is consistent amongst the value chain. They're also monitoring to make sure that the condition of machines, whether that's the actual end use apparatus or the point of sale, are maintained in good condition, and that there's a uniform process that is followed for both producing, transporting, and storing hydrogen. And then realistically, we also want to reduce our TRIF rate and how much money it actually costs to operate these facilities. And while this tapestry can get a little complicated, government can get involved. Um, Everyone's working towards the same sort of umbrella of risk mitigation, which is to keep everyone safe and to keep all of our machines and apparatus performing as they are intended to, and to remain compliant with any sort of corporate policies and local government regulations or legislation. With that, I'll pass it back to you, Marty.
Thank you, Adam. So to set the stage for some of the later discussion, I want to quickly talk about what are some of the really key effects of impurities in hydrogen in the different use cases where it's used. So the diagram on the left shows some of the potential effects of using hydrogen with different impurities when it's used either for heat or for energy generation. So just to walk down the list quickly, some key effects across all the use cases include things like catalyst poisoning, equipment corrosion and degradation, reduced energy efficiency when hydrogen is used either in combustion or in power generation. Impurities can also affect sensor and control system malfunction or cause system malfunction, and impurities can also impose safety hazards. The most important effect or the most damaging effect of impurities in hydrogen is certainly when they occur in fuel cells. So that really shows up in two main ways. The first is catalyst poisoning in fuel cells, and that consequently leads to decreased performance or energy efficiency in fuel cells. So this diagram that I'm showing on screen shows a few different types of impurities that can show up either in the hydrogen fuel itself that's entering into proton exchange membrane fuel cell, or contaminants that can come in the oxygen or air that's being supplied to a fuel cell stack. So all of these different impurities, essentially what they can do is latch onto the catalyst surface on either the anode or cathode side of the fuel cell, and they essentially block active sites for hydrogen molecules or oxygen molecules to be dissociated into their atomic forms. And what that leads to is a significant degradation or decrease in the output power of the fuel cell. And that's shown in this kind of representative plot at the bottom of this figure where my cursor's circled. So at first, you don't really see the effect of impurities in the hydrogen. It's really a cumulative effect where as more and more active sites on the catalyst surface are essentially blocked, you see a very gradual reduction in the performance of the fuel cell. And if essentially, if this goes on for long enough without some kind of mitigation, the fuel cell effectively becomes unusable because it's not delivering any power. So the next most important effect of impurities in hydrogen is on equipment, and that shows up as equipment corrosion and degradation, particularly in metallic kind of handling equipment. So one category of impurities is with oxygen or water. Those can lead to corrosion of metallic components. And the next category is sulfur compounds that kind of work in synergy with hydrogen to lead to sulfidation corrosion or stress corrosion cracking, or potentially both. So it's really important to select materials properly, but also to purify hydrogen to keep these impurities out so these damage mechanisms do not occur. Adam, switch over to you to talk about various impurities.
Great. Thanks, Marty. I want to talk about the word impurity for a moment. Impurity is anything that's in hydrogen that isn't hydrogen. So that is literally everything except hydrogen. But there are a number of impurities that we know impact the technology of today. And I've broken them out into 6 categories. I won't list them all out for you. You can see most of them on the screen, but the categories are fixed or inert gases, sulfur compounds, moisture, halogenated compounds, organic compounds, and then solid particulates and an oil mist. Moisture gets its own category because H2O can be in many different forms, gas, liquid, solid. But the gas form is probably the most damaging as it is carried through any hydrogen stream. What I will say is that these are the impurities that are of concern today. These are identified as pain points or incompatibilities based on the limitations of technology today. And technology means both production method and the end use apparatus or machine or components. And all of these compounds, there are known ways to analyze them. However, detection limit has always been kind of the Achilles heel for a lot of these compounds. And I'll get into that in a little more detail coming up, but I just want to plant the seed for you now that when I talk about impurity, I'm talking about everything other than hydrogen. And Marty, can you just advance the slide for me? Where these impurities come from is also sort of dependent on the production method you use and the feedstock you use. I don't think it's a surprise to say that the quality of the feedstock you use affects the quality of the product you get out. I think we all kind of understand that innately. And when we get a product and we're trying to purify it, if we don't purify it completely, obviously we get a less pure product on the outside. I'm saying things that are very obvious. But the 3 main ways that we produce hydrogen can yield different impurity profiles. The first being steam methane reforming, has the widest array, I would say, of impurities, but for the most part, they are the easiest to analyze. So that's like carbon monoxide, carbon dioxide, sulfur, nitrogen, oxygen, anything that's from the air. Electrolysis has a pretty narrow profile because you're taking water, ideally very pure water, and most of your byproducts of electrolysis are oxygen, hydrogen, some of the nitrogen that gets through in an airstream, and then the water itself that you used. Now, if you use a water source that has an electrolyte residue, electrolysis of electrolytes can lead to things like chlorination and bromination. They're usually slightly smaller in scope here in terms of how much residues in the hydrogen gas, because you're usually starting with hyper-pure water to begin with, but it is a risk. And then biomass gasification, very broad topic. It basically opens itself up to every possible type of impurity, with biomass gasification having a high chloride content and a high acid content, which can be extremely damaging, which means the gas you're producing from this process likely needs to be checked more often than something from, say, electrolysis or steam methane reformation. And with that, Marty, I'll pass back to you.
Perfect. Thank you, Adam. So this everything we've said so far about different impurities and how to analyze them is very important. But there's a key step in the production process, and potentially, also at the dispensing or use side of the hydrogen value chain, which is about purification. So there are many different purification methods that exist, but two main ones that I'll touch on briefly today are pressure swing adsorption and membranes. So these are the two most common methods applied in industry for cleaning up hydrogen and removing impurities. So with pressure swing adsorption, you essentially have a sequence of layered beds of different adsorbent materials, and a hydrogen product is passed through the adsorbent bed, and impurities are removed. The hydrogen emerges typically at high pressure from this process, and the desorption of the impurities that have been removed is kind of exhausted as a tail gas stream. So this particular method is commonly applied from small to very large scales. I would say it's probably the most common method of the two. This method requires the hydrogen feed to be supplied to the purification process at a high pressure. The impurities are removed at near ambient pressure, as I mentioned, in the tail gas as the process kind of desorbs from the adsorbent material. So with this process, it can achieve very, very high purities of hydrogen when the purification occurs in multiple steps, or as the hydrogen product is passed over multiple layers or beds of adsorbent material. The next method is with membranes. This is a common method, but a little bit less so than PSA. It tends to be favorable at slightly lower capacities than for pressure swing adsorption. This method, you feed the hydrogen product at high pressure, and the hydrogen essentially flows across the membrane, and everything else you don't want to flow through is retained on the upstream side of the membrane, and the retentate, or the material containing the impurities, stays at the high pressure side, while the hydrogen flows out at low pressure. So what this essentially means, comparing the two methods, is if you want to have a hydrogen product at a high pressure, with PSA, you don't need as much compression after the process to keep the hydrogen at a high pressure, whereas with membrane separation, compression is almost certainly required after membrane separation to achieve the desired pressure. With membranes as well, when you just pass the hydrogen through it in a single pass, the purity you get in the product hydrogen is a little bit lower than what you'd get with PSA. So you typically need to go through multiple membrane stages to achieve the same purity. The next slide here just shows a couple of diagrams of, in very conceptual terms, how PSA and membranes work. So in the case of pressure swing adsorption, you essentially have different layers of adsorbent materials that target the adsorption of different impurities in your hydrogen product. So you can see, typically you'd start by removing easier things like aromatics and sulfur compounds, and you'd gradually progress to remove more difficult fixed gases like nitrogen, carbon monoxide, and methane. And what comes out is your purified hydrogen that does not adsorb to the material in the PSA unit. For membranes, as I'd mentioned before, you're essentially feeding your hydrogen product through, and hydrogen is the only product that kind of gets through, depending on what kind of material is selected for the membranes. Oops. The last thing I'll mention on the topic of hydrogen purification methods is relating to relative costs for pressure swing adsorption and membranes. So I've grabbed this one figure that shows different price components or cost components to the final cost of hydrogen coming from different production methods and layering on different, say, transportation methods and kind of use cases. And purification shows up as a cost component in several of these use cases. So the one I'm highlighting here is for a high pressure hydrogen product produced from steam methane reforming, and it compares pressure swing adsorption to membrane technology. So if I take these two bars and translate them over to this table on the right, you can see that the purification cost itself is on the order of about 10 cents US dollars per kilogram of hydrogen, with the membrane purification being slightly less expensive than PSA. But if you want to achieve a high pressure hydrogen product, like I mentioned earlier, you have to add more compression energy to get to your high pressure conditions, which means that pressure swing adsorption plus compression winds up being a little bit cheaper at the end of the day than membrane purification. So with that, I will switch over to Adam again to talk about quality standards. Sorry, Adam, you're muted.
Technical difficulty. Thank you. So what you see on screen right now is a table that I've taken or replicated from an international quality standard called ISO 14687. And it covers the different impurities that are allowable within hydrogen fuel for a fuel cell vehicle. And this covers, to be more specific, type 1 and type 2 grade D hydrogen. So that's type 1 is gaseous, type 2 is liquid, and grade D is for PEM fuel cell vehicles that are roadworthy. And what you'll notice here on the right-hand column is the maximum allowable concentration of the impurity in that hydrogen stream before it will start damaging or is known to start causing harmful effects within a PEM fuel cell. We don't need to go through the nitty-gritty of each one because their limits, they fluctuate based on the technology of today and the needs of the fuel cells that they're going in. But I want to draw attention for a moment to the bottom two rows, these yellow rows where it says total non-hydrogen gases. Remember when I said impurity was everything other than hydrogen? So that means that the total non-hydrogen allowable going into a fuel cell is 300 parts per million, which means that your hydrogen at a minimum has to be 99.97% pure. For those of you who are looking astutely, you might notice that there are two compounds on this list, halogenated compounds and total sulfur compounds, that actually you wouldn't even capture the concentration of those impurities if you were strictly looking at the hydrogen fuel index, or the purity of it. And I'm going to take a brief moment to pause and just highlight that I've taken this standard from the international standard, the ISO 14687. It's a standard that governs hydrogen purity for many different applications, including fuel cells. There is an American equivalent called SAEJ 2719. That's another term that is sort of colloquially used within the hydrogen value chain to mean sort of like the highest quality hydrogen available. But technically, the SAE standard only covers automotive hydrogen. There's a European standard, and then there are other Canadian, so the Canadian Gas, or the Compressed Gas Alliance. They have their own, I'll say, recommendations and guidelines, but in almost all cases, they mirror the ISO standard quite well. I want to bring your attention to that. I'm focusing on the ISO standard. I also focus a little on the SAE, but they effectively are perfect mirrors of each other for the time being. So with that, I want to go to the next slide, and I'm going to take a moment to talk about terminology. So I was using the word purity to describe the hydrogen fuel index at 99.97. Purity in this case refers only to the amount of the gas you are selling, or that you want, or that you're saying hydrogen and you mean purity of hydrogen. So 99.97% only includes the hydrogen in that term. When I talk about the quality of hydrogen, I'm including the purity as well, but I'm now encompassing everything else that's in that 0.03% that remains. And it is critical that we look at that 0.03% because it can contain very low levels of highly problematic compounds like sulfur compounds and halogenated compounds. The quality of a hydrogen product is related to the end application. So I can't say by default that a high purity hydrogen is therefore a high quality hydrogen. They are independent terms. You can have a high purity hydrogen that is of low quality if you're intending to use it within a fuel cell. I will draw again a parallel to gasoline and internal combustion engines. The gasoline that your engine uses to run is not what we test for when we are testing those fuels to determine if they are compliant with the engine or not. We make the assumption that the bulk of the material is the gasoline, but we are looking for things like heavy metals, water, anti-knock agents, ensuring that the octane grade that's at the pump matches what you are being delivered within your vehicle. That's the quality of the fuel. So in the world of hydrogen, that legislative, that regulatory framework is not fully in place just yet, but we will get there eventually. But for the time being, I really want to hammer home this terminology of purity versus quality. Something can be 5 nines pure and potentially, depending on the application, still be of low quality, or at least not appropriate for that application. So with that, Marty, if you want to go to the next slide for me. We have established ways of analyzing all of these, thankfully. We don't need to reinvent the wheel. Like I mentioned before, detection limit has always kind of been one of the limiting factors, but our techniques have gotten to a point where we can analyze everything on that list, and we can analyze it quite well. There is, however, no standardized, or what we call referee list of ways to analyze these compounds. There are recommendations, there are best practices, but unlike in the world of, say, gasoline, diesel, jet fuel, there isn't a regulatory body within our governments or within the private sector that says you all have to use the following methods to analyze your fuel in order to be compliant. So I will go over some of the recommended options in just a moment, but I will say that in general, all analytical techniques for hydrogen are going to use some combination of gas chromatography, mass spec, connected gas chromatography, and FTIR. But on top of that, you also need to consider how you're sampling your hydrogen, because theoretically, as you sample and as you transport and store hydrogen, you introduce impurities that you're then going to analyze. So that's a consideration that always needs to be there, but it's not something that gets solved by having better and better analytical techniques. So Marty, if you want to go to the next slide for me. Here, I've given some recommended methods for analyzing hydrogen. You can see I've given under the heading ISO 21087. They'll have very easy to remember 5-digit numbers. But this ISO standard effectively lays out recommended methods for analyzing hydrogen, but to be clear, is not prescriptive. So it has some methods that have shown to be a good or best practice, but is not necessarily the only method you need to use to analyze. So there's a method that includes a sulfur detector for measuring total sulfur compounds. There's a method that uses an FTIR for analyzing IR active compounds. We have an ECD detector for analyzing halogenated compounds. But there are other methods that are out there that are being developed. I'll call them custom methodologies because they're just not standardized yet. They use other types of detectors or other ways of analyzing these compounds, PFPD being one of the more common ones for analyzing sulfur, and XCD being one of the more up and coming ones for analyzing halogenated compounds. The key here, and for anybody who's worked in sort of the analytical services sector, knows that there are three major, we'll call them boxes you need to check if you want any of your methods to be considered valid and accurate. And that's traceability, metrological traceability, accreditation, so having a third party audit your process to ensure that your bias isn't being injected into the results. And then certification. Are you certified to perform the services, and are you able to certify the fuels that you're analyzing? These are the three things that any lab, any facility, any company that wants to analyze hydrogen and do so in a transparent and reliable way will need to hone in on. And so with that, hopefully I've given you a good picture of what hydrogen quality means and how you can ensure quality in the value chain. Marty, I'm going to go to the next slide, and I'm going to cover sort of the challenges and best practices that we've identified. This is non-exhaustive. This is based on our perspective and our experience working in this sector. And people in the audience, you may have different challenges and may have different best practices. We'd like to hear about those as well. So I've broken them into three categories. The first is, Marty brought this up initially, which is the supply chain, the value chain, maintaining hydrogen purity and hydrogen quality in the hydrogen supply chain. So that is going to mean your purification method needs to be robust, highly sophisticated, but it also means that your product needs to be analyzed at every point in the supply chain and somewhat frequently, depending on how often your feedstock or your process is changing. The second is in the calibration and the validation of the equipment that you're using to analyze hydrogen quality. One of the biggest gaps right now in hydrogen analysis is that there's a very narrow selection of standards and certified reference materials to build analytical methods on. And so we're kind of in a chicken and the egg situation. We need to create highly pure, high quality standards and reference materials, but we need to be able to prove it with certificates of analysis that require us to develop highly sophisticated analytical techniques. The second is a best practice metrological traceability. For anybody that works in a lab, this is your quality management system. This is the thing that you can point to any external party and say, we are certain of the results that we are measuring in our lab. And then the third one is interlaboratory studies and consensus value quality control. And this is kind of a mouthful, but what this effectively means is we don't just want a standardized method. We also want every lab that's running that method to kind of check amongst themselves to make sure that we're all doing it the same way and that we're all getting the same results or the same expected results for a given hydrogen, say, supply or sample. And then the last category is your monitoring, real time versus batch testing. In a perfect world, every process will have a real time online analysis suite that will tell you the quality of the product you're making as you make it. It is highly impractical to do so. And for some of the analytes that are in the specification list, it's actually impossible with the current technology. Um, Batch testing gives you a lot of convenience. It lets you analyze everything on that list. It's more practical, it's less expensive, but it is also prone to error because as soon as you start transporting, storing, sampling hydrogen, you introduce points of potential contamination. And when the limits are so low, you need to be extra cautious about how you're performing those steps. And so the best practice here really is ultimately going to be a combination of point of delivery and lab-based testing. Um, as an example, particulate matter in hydrogen can only be done. You can only analyze it at the point of delivery. You can't do it in a lab because particulates don't transport particularly well in a compressed cylinder, at least not in a way that represents the fuel itself. But something like, say, sulfur and chlorine, those have detection limits that are so low that there are no online analyzers that can do it at this moment. So those need to be done in the lab. And that's kind of the picture that we're going to paint and kind of leave you with as far as what are the big challenges and what are the best practices. And this is evolving. So this is the state of the supply chain right now, but it may change in a month. It may change in a year. So Marty, with that, I'll transition back to you if you want to sign us off here.
Sure thing. So that's all we have for the audience today. I want to thank you all for joining the call. I believe we're going to transition back to Zach to moderate some questions and answers. And again, thank you all for joining today.
Great. Thank you so much, Martin and Adam. So yeah, we got a few questions coming in. I've certainly got some. I know we only have 13 minutes and you've got a hard stop there, Adam. So maybe we could do some rapid fire. So, in terms of kind of a boots on the ground, is your facility ready? Are you accepting testing requests now? And how can organizations start the process if they're looking to get tested, if they're hydrogen tested?
Yeah, we're ready to go now. We can support anybody that has any type of testing need that they have at the moment for hydrogen as it pertains to that ISO 14687 fuel spec that I mentioned. Depending on the operation, Marty mentioned that compressibility can sometimes be a limiting factor in facilities. So, in order to do a lot of testing, we need a lot of hydrogen sample, which requires a lot of compression. So there are limitations based on what we can analyze, based on how much hydrogen like a client can compress for us. But certainly nothing is impossible.
Great. That's wonderful to hear. Now, in continuing on that thread of testing, what is an average test? How long does it take? Is it a matter of hours, days, weeks, months? Just I really don't have a clue. And then like a ballpark cost, not asking specifics, but are we in the hundreds, thousands, tens of thousands? What are we looking at for tests?
Yeah, so turnaround time for a full like fuel cell specification grade is going to be 5 to 10 business days. That's kind of standard practice for most testing. We can do faster. Just requires us to work with you on that. Ballpark cost is you're going to be in the low thousands for a full suite, but certainly if you need it done faster or slower, or if you only need certain components analyzed because you've got an online analyzer for other pieces, that price fluctuates very quickly.
Okay, great. So maybe I'm going to go to the audience here. We have a number of questions. So there was some revolving kind of around fuel cell fouling or poisoning, and which compounds would be the most likely to. I think you mentioned it, right? In terms of like on a ppm scale, it'd be halogenated compounds and sulfur compounds are probably the most toxic, if that's the right terminology. Is that really the ones you want to avoid in terms of poisoning your fuel cell?
I mean, so Marty and I might have different answers for this. But as a chemist, I see sulfur as highly problematic because it bonds so rapidly to any metallic surface and irreversibly so. So it'll poison your catalyst permanently. So it's not like you can just run cleaner fuel through it and burn it out. It's effectively permanent damage with some nuance there. And then chlorinated compounds form very quickly organic acids and become very corrosive very quickly. Martin, do you have a different perspective on what are the most problematic components on that list?
No, I agree 100%, especially with the sulfur compounds. My understanding is there are there are ways to kind of reverse any effects of some impurities on fuel cells, but with sulfur compounds, they're very difficult to remove once they enter the system, and so in that way, they are probably the most harmful to fuel cell performance.
Great. Okay, we have a question here. So this is a little spicy question from the audience. So, there's a comment that they use quality testing in labs in the USA, which have hydrogen experience. What would be the advantage to folks within Canada sending their samples north of the border to your facility? And has Measurement Canada provided any insights on being involved with hydrogen quality regulations, if you have an answer on that?
Do we have a predominantly Canadian audience? I would
I
say
believe so. Yeah.
if you're a Canadian operator, your your benefit here is working with a local provider. You aren't um, susceptible to the whims of any ongoing tariffs or border crossing shipments that might get hung up for whatever reason. You may also be able to get your testing turned around a lot faster. So if you happen to be able to hotshot a sample to us, we might be able to turn it around much, much faster than if you shipped it to the US. And that's true for any lab in Canada that will analyze any sample. I think shorter the distance has to travel, the better. Would we love to receive samples north of the border from down south? Sure. I think that's highly unlikely considering that, the audience here likely knows that there are options in the US already available to them. Um, yeah, Martin, you want to chime in?
Sure. The only other element I'll add there is that some US labs have uh, ISO 17025 accreditation and some do not. InnoTech Alberta does have that accreditation for a wide variety of test methods, and we're working toward adding the test methods in our Hydrogen Quality Center to that accreditation. So it just ensures the quality and reliability of the results that we're providing.
Great. Team Canada, right? That's the big point as well. So we greatly appreciate that. I know we're coming up close. We only have 7 minutes left here. I see a question from Bob. Any thoughts on hydrogen purity for dual fuel applications? Obviously, that's a pretty hot topic right now. Or combustion versus fuel cell. Do you have any thoughts on that?
Yeah, maybe I'll take that question. So in preparing for this webinar and, kind of understanding what are some of the effects of impurities in different use cases, by all accounts, looking through the literature, it looks like using hydrogen for combustion is the most tolerant to impurities. So it looks like there's the least impact of impurities on, say, the quality of combustion. There may still be impacts of impurities on, say, the materials that are used for burning hydrogen, like in terms of hydrogen embrittlement or corrosion, but the combustion process itself is very resistant and tolerant to impurities.
Great. Okay, well, lots of questions coming in. That's great. And I would encourage anyone, if we don't get to your questions, Adam and Martin's emails are up on the screen. So I think, it's safe to say feel free to reach out to you guys to
100%.
follow up with any questions.
Mhm.
Great. Um, so here's an interesting question from Scott, talking about, when you get quoted prices for different colors or different, how the hydrogen is made, for various versions. Do we assume they're quoting at similar levels of purity, or do you think that further information is going to be needed in terms of understanding the purity more so than potentially the original, where it's derived from.
So, in my opinion, when somebody's being quoted on a hydrant product, part of it, I would say most of that cost is coming from the cost of the production method itself, which may include a purification step. But another component of that pricing, especially for, say, like lab grade hydrant or kind of lab scale hydrant, is for the quality or purity of the hydrant product. So it depends a little bit on the scale at which the hydrant is being ordered, and that will potentially affect the quality that's required. But for the most part, especially with regard to different production methods, the cost is being derived from the cost of production itself.
Great.
Precisely. And I would just want to, I'll add on here, never assume that you're being quoted a similar or a expected purity level. Always ask. I mean, for the most part, they're probably going to quote you the purity level. They're going to tell you how many nines it is. But depending on your application, if you have any intent of putting it in a fuel cell, ask for a C of A, get that certification, because for the most part, you can capture a lot of the impurities within that purity number, but some you cannot. So if they're quoting you 5 nines, but it's got high, in air quotes, high sulfur content, you may want to think twice about putting that through a fuel cell.
And just for clarity, COA stands for Certificate of Analysis.
Yes, thank you. Jargon. Thank you, Marty.
Great. Well, I say, if you don't hear a new acronym by 12 o'clock, you make up a new one, right? So
right.
Certainly the case. Hey, questions are flying in, so I know we're not going to be able to get to them all. Folks, I'd really encourage you to reach out to both Adam and Martin. They're wonderful people. I'm sure they'll answer your questions. Two real quick questions. I know you got to go. Frequency of testing. Are there recommended intervals? What's industry kind of doing? What should people be looking at in terms of if we get a fueling station, in Edmonton or Calgary, what should we be looking at? And then mobile testing, is that an option? Are you looking at that?
That's a big question, but I'll start and Martin can kind of chime in and give his perspective. Just from a scientific statistical perspective, you want frequent sampling and you want it to be consistent. Frequency really does depend on how often you are, say, moving that hydrogen. So if you have a tank of hydrogen, you've tested it and it's just sitting there, you may not need to test it more than monthly or quarterly. But if you have a constantly moving supply through a given point of storage or point of delivery, more frequent, especially if you're commissioning a new station or a new point of delivery, you may want to sample weekly, and then move down to monthly and quarterly, depending on your operational constraint. And then I'll let Martin pick up in a second here, but I just want to say in mobile testing is, in the grand scheme, not likely a practical solution yet, because if you want to do the full suite of analysis, you need some very sensitive equipment, and you just can't put that in the back of a truck. It has to be in a building on cement blocks that's dampened. You really do have to have well-controlled lab conditions for that. Now, there's likely an operational component to this, and Martin, maybe you have a perspective here you can share.
Sure. So, like you mentioned earlier, Adam, one specific impurity for particulates can only be analyzed at the point of delivery or dispensing site, and that's per test methods that exist. For other specific impurities, like potentially some fixed gases or things like that, there may be online analyzers that exist. They may not have the detection limit that aligns with the ISO specification, but they could be good enough for like continuous monitoring. And, if there are spikes in impurities that show up, then you take a sample and send it to, a lab for more careful analysis.
Great. Hey, I know we're running up on time. I just want to thank you, Adam and Martin, very much. Folks, I know we didn't get to everyone's questions. I apologize. Please reach out and get those questions answered. And thank you. And I guess, as I mentioned earlier, the webinar will be posted on our website, calgaryhydrogen.ca, next week at some point. Please sign up for our next networking event and our next webinar, The Road to Hydrogen Fueling in Calgary, at calgaryhydrogen.ca. Adam, Martin, thank you so much.
Thank you, Zach.
Take care,
Bye-bye.
everyone.